As we get started here, I do want to give credit to a bunch of scholars. I'm going to borrow some ideas from Craig Keener, N.T. Wright, Leon Morris, and this guy's, he's more of a pastor than a scholar, John Mark Comer. And this book, Live No Lies, I pulled a bunch of stuff from here too, and I did last week as well. Anyways, for those of you who like to read, I'd recommend this book. Check it out. It's really good. It's called Live No Lies. This particular guy has a couple of really good books out there, but anyways, I really like just the whole arc of what he's saying here in terms of helping us to recognize and resist the three enemies that sabotage our peace. And well, like every book, there might be a point or two in here that I might argue with him and add more nuance and stuff like that. The arc of the book here is excellent. And there's a few things that he discusses that he just does such a great job of doing. Anyways, like some of the things that we're going to quote today out of this book. So anyways, I like to read a lot of books, so I hope it doesn't bother you that I keep recommending a number of them, but there we go. Okay, so we are now faithfully continuing on our journey to learn Jesus through the lens of Matthew's gospel. Yay! I know that I've been enjoying this journey. We're not rushing through it, as if there's something more important than Jesus to talk about. We're kind of taking, a slower and a careful pace. And because we're taking a slower and careful pace, we can really dig in and really see some stuff that maybe we couldn't if we just kind of rushed through it a little bit, like as if we have to be somewhere else or something like that. So I just love that we're taking that time to really deeply learn and to draw close and to and in the process, too, make a continual stream of decisions to follow Jesus and become more like him. And, even though I've been on this Jesus journey since before I was born, there's always so much more into which we can grow. And I'm still finding that now. Like, Jesus is an inexhaustible source of life and wholeness. So I'm just, I'm loving this process, and I hope you are too. Okay. So as we dig in here, I would like for you, even just for a few seconds, if you'd like, just to close your eyes and remember the biggest or one of the biggest storms that you've ever experienced. And I'm talking like a weather storm. Just kind of get that picture in your head, in your imagination. Okay, there we go. Yeah, I think that picture will be helpful in terms of what we're dealing with here in the scriptures. Now, this past August, when you can open your eyes now. I don't want you falling asleep during the message. Not that you would. Anyways, this past August, when Karis and I were in Florida for our sabbatical, to visit family and to visit the beach, we experienced Tropical Storm Fred. And we experienced Fred up close and personal. So as we were driving from where we were staying in Miami up to the Tampa area, where we would stay our last 2 weeks there, we had to drive through the southwest corner of Florida, which is kind of how you have to swing up from Miami to Tampa. And we decided to take a little bit more of the scenic route. So it's a 5-hour journey through the Everglades to Naples, heading north. And even though we knew that the storm was near, because we were getting, a little bit of rain in Miami and all that kind of stuff, and the skies were a little foreboding, we still decided to take a little detour, a scenic detour, to a place called Marco Island for some quick sightseeing. So if you go on your map, you'll see Marco Island is this island kind of off the coast of Florida, like west of Naples, right in the Gulf of Mexico. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, so we just had to see it. And then we thought, hey, we got the time to do it, why not? Well, while we were in Marco Island, Fred approached a lot quicker than we thought. Looking at the radar, appeared to be out at sea, but if you know anything about tropical storms and hurricanes, those legs of the hurricanes, can stretch like 100 miles out from the eye. Well, Fred was no different, and he came in quite fast. So while we were there admiring the beauty of Marco Island, the skies started turning black and the wind started kicking up. And so we're just like, uh-oh, time to bust a move. So we got in our car and we made our way towards Naples, kind of on the little highway back to the mainland towards Naples and up north. Well, our car, the trusty Toyota, wasn't quite fast enough because Fred caught up with us in a hurry. And pretty soon we were engulfed in these dark black clouds, like so dark that the headlights turned on as if it were night. And then moments later on the highway, the rain came. And boy, did it come. The rain was so thick that it was nearly impossible to see through the windshield. So tons of cars had just pulled over to the side, and everybody else like us was going up I-75, maybe 30 or 40 miles an hour there for a while. And not only was there rain, there was lightning, and so much lightning and big bolts, and it was super close. So close and so fierce that, in fact, it reset the electronics on our car twice. Boom, like that, and all of a sudden, welcome to Toyota. And it's like, oh boy, that's a little close. And a few minutes later, welcome to Toyota. It's just like, oh, thank God the Japanese know how to build electronics, because otherwise our car might be toast, So now, like all storms like this, we had a profound awareness of the great power of the storm and of nature in general. And there's something about that power where it is far beyond the power that we humans possess. Like when a storm like that comes in, there's not really anything we can do other than duck and run for cover. Maybe find a big solid rock or something like that. And the point here that I'm trying to make with the storm story is just this awareness that there is power that is far beyond our control. And sometimes there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. Now, as we dive into the middle section of Matthew chapter 12, we're once again confronted with the issue of power. And that there is power in our world, and there is some power that is beyond what we can cope with, that is beyond our control. And when that kind of power appears, the human heart becomes vulnerable. We become vulnerable when dealing with that kind of power. So, from our passage today, we're going to learn something from the Pharisees, particularly what not to do, like what can happen to the heart when we encounter that kind of power. And more importantly, we can learn from Jesus how to cultivate a pure heart that will see God, to riff off one of his Beatitudes. So let's turn to Matthew chapter 12. Now today we're going to read from verses 22 to 37, but as we've done in the past couple weeks, we're just going to break it up into chunks because I think it's just a little bit more easy to digest that way. So we'll start with just verses 22 through 29. Then they brought him a demon-possessed man who was blind and mute, and Jesus healed him so that he could both talk and see. All the people were astonished and said, "Could this be the son of David?" But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, "It's only by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, that this fellow drives out demons." Jesus knew their thoughts and said to them, "Every kingdom divided against itself will be ruined, and every city or household divided against itself will not stand. If Satan drives out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then can his kingdom stand? And if I drive out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your people drive them out? So then they will be your judges. But if it is by the Spirit of God that I drive out demons, then the kingdom of God has come upon you. Or again, how can anyone enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man? Then he can plunder his house." Now, one of the key features of the Bible, especially for us modern Westerners, is how the Bible reveals to us the reality of the unseen world. Numerous modern philosophies try to tell us that the unseen world doesn't exist, There's no God, there's no devil, there's no angels, there's no demons. Hey, where are they? I can see them. Can you see them? So even if you've never heard, even if you've never heard the names materialism, naturalism, empiricism, positivism, or know about the people who wrote about these kind of ideas, they are not so subtly ingrained within our cultural thinking and our history. Yet, God has revealed himself to people, and he continues to do so. And part of God's self-revelation to people, many people through past centuries, past millennia, recorded these experiences in what we have compiled on the pages of the Bible. Through the written word, God not only reveals himself, but God reveals that there is a devil, there are angels, there are demons. And while God created these spiritual beings for good, some of them, of their own free will, chose to rebel. And great darkness came into our world. Thus, that's part of that process. Thus, the Bible reveals to us that we are in the midst of this long-standing cosmic spiritual battle that profoundly affects the world that we do see. This is a reality that the Bible reveals to us. So to revisit our opening metaphor, we are in the middle of a powerful storm. We have some dark clouds that come over, and sometimes the wind kicks up, and sometimes the rains come. And sometimes we got to duck and run for cover. We are in the middle of a powerful storm, and we're waiting for the sun to break through. God reveals to us that there is a power far beyond our control, and yet at the same time, we can have trust and we can have faith because all power ultimately belongs to him. Now, our passage is headed off by a deliverance and healing story. It's amazing to everyone who witnesses this that Jesus has the power over dark spiritual forces that tormented this man and played a part in his blindness and in his muteness. Like, who can do that? It's amazing at the same time, that Jesus heals these two serious physical ailments, generally thought of as impossible. Now, amazing as that is, the deliverance and the healing are not the focus of the story, if you notice. Matthew focuses attention on what? On the reaction of the people to these acts of great power. Now, the amazed crowds are asking the question, they're like, can this be the Son of David? Like, did you see that? Can it be the Son of David? And even though Jesus was not at all what they expected, the evidence that they see, it draws their hearts to wonder, like, could it be possible? Is Jesus the one? Now, we also see that the Pharisees had quite a different reaction. They're like, it's only by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, that this fellow drives out demons. Now, notice that they call Jesus this fellow. Like, they don't even give him the dignity of the name because of their being, so hardened heart towards him. And that term Beelzebul, it's a Jewish slang term for the devil. Similarly, they're not even giving the devil the dignity of a proper name, so they use this slang term Beelzebul, which can be translated, depending on the region and the time, Lord of the Flies or Lord of Dung. Yeah, or some other words related to that, like that kind of thing. So they're using some very low and derogatory language within their reaction. Now, in this scene, there is zero question in anyone's mind. What happened there at that moment was an exercise of great power. And it is a power that is far beyond any normal human control. What they saw, we just can't normally do. Great power is here. That was not a question. The real question is, what or who is the source of that great power? Is God involved here? Or is it the devil? Who is the source of that power? Now, why would they question that? You know, the crowd seemed to be questioning, can this be the son of David? And the Pharisees are like, I think this is the devil. Why would they question that? Particularly, why would the Pharisees question what they saw? Everything Jesus had been doing, his announcing the kingdom in a way that is completely upside down from expected, and welcoming the outcasts, the sinners, showing radical mercy, inviting people into fellowship, everything Jesus had been doing. And everything Jesus had not been doing, particularly preparing for a revolution, for a revolt, for a violent takeover, for the liberation of their land, politic against politic, power against power. He hadn't been doing that. Everything he had been doing, everything he hadn't been doing, everything about Jesus appeared to be going in the exact opposite direction of what they expected God and his kingdom to be about. So the accusation of operating in the power of the devil was a complete rejection of Jesus, everything that he was doing, everything that they were seeing in this whole entire kingdom movement. A complete rejection. Now Jesus answers the Pharisees with a series of counter questions and counter charges. And I find the way Jesus responds to the situation utterly compelling. I mean, first Jesus points out just the obvious here. The devil's not an idiot. He's been in business a long time. The devil's not an idiot, and he would not be divided against himself, continually undoing his own work. It's not like he would be out there shoveling snow and have someone right behind him putting the snow back on the sidewalk. The devil's not an idiot. He would not have somebody continuously undoing his work. If the devil is wanting control over more people, he's not going to give Jesus the power for wholesale rescue to set them all free. It's an illogical argument. And he's pointing that out. And next, Jesus points out that his willingness to free people from demonic bondage does not imply collusion with the devil, because after all, there are some exorcists among the Pharisees. So their accusation would immediately fall back on themselves. Again, Jesus points out this logical inconsistency. Now, the argument here is not just to reveal flawed logic, although it does that. It's that the clear lack of logic does what? It reveals that there's something in the heart going on here. I mean, we've probably all had that experience where we can hear people talk about something meaningful to them, but you can kind of see it's like there's some logical inconsistencies here and the puzzle pieces don't fit together. And what do we intuitively know? Okay, what's going on in here? Then we can start asking some of the real questions. Jesus is pointing out the exact same thing. This isn't clear. There's something going on in here, and we better figure out what that is. Now, from the biblical and historical record, it appears that most Pharisees believed that the prophetic spirit was quenched when the last of the biblical prophets had died. And that the spirit would only be restored in the time of the kingdom. Now, although many Pharisees apparently rejected miracles as proof of truth, Jesus summons them to consider an alternative explanation for his miracles. That the works that he was doing was a sign of what Israel was desperately longing for, but just didn't expect it to look like this. Like what you're seeing could be what you've been waiting for centuries. And specifically that very thing, that time of the promised spirit and the kingdom, that they've actually come on the scene here, bursting in as a power to be reckoned with. The kind of power that is beyond our control. Much like a big storm, but this storm is a good storm. Now, what Jesus had done in delivering the demonized man is actually a sign of something that he's already done. So there's already a series of signs here in place. What Jesus had done in delivering the demonized man is a sign of something he's already done. Verse 29, Jesus makes this this cryptic statement. How can anyone enter a strong man's house and carry off his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man? Then he can plunder his house. Now, within this statement here, the strong man he's implying is the devil here. Jesus is able to help himself to the property of the strong man. Why? Because he's already tied him up. You have to first win victory over the devil, then you can plunder his house. Now, you may be asking, well, when did he do that? I didn't see that in the text here. Well, we got to think back a little bit further here in our journey through Matthew, all the way back to chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. We actually read the Lucan version in our lectionary readings this morning. Think back to Matthew 4, where the Spirit leads Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Jesus fasted for 40 days and for 40 nights. And then the devil came and tempted him. What happened? Jesus won the victory. The devil threw everything at him. He threw all of the major temptations of the heart, of the human heart at him. And Jesus won. Jesus won the victory over the tempter. Now, this is an aside to our Matthew 12 passage here, but I think it's very helpful and an important one. We're just going to take a little deeper peek at Matthew 4 here. I think this is helpful, especially as we've just entered the season of Lent here, which is a remembrance of the 40 days Jesus spent fasting in the wilderness where he was tempted. Now, John Mark Comer, who wrote that book, Live No Lies, that I introduced you to a few minutes ago, he makes some comments on this that I think are worth considering. Says it better than I could. He says, we sometimes look at this temptation story thinking that the devil waited until Jesus was exhausted, hungry, and weak until he can go in and make his move. This grossly misunderstands the reciprocal relationship between fasting and spiritual power. 40 days in, Jesus was at the height of his spiritual power and thus was able to wisely discern the devil's lies and dismiss his temptations with shrewd skill. Richard Foster astutely observed that more than any other discipline, fasting reveals the things that control us. Few practices humble us like fasting. You know, if you've ever done it before, and by fasting, it's not just like, oh, I think I'll give up Facebook for 2 hours, you know. we're talking like actual fasting, like no food. And like Christians through the centuries, when they would celebrate Lent, from sun up to sundown, no food, just water, that kind of fasting. And few practices can humble us like fasting. Why? Because when you begin, it's common to kind of feel sad, anxious, maybe, you're getting hangry or something like that. Like it really tests you, and there's this battle over what your flesh wants, and you're saying no to it and giving ascendancy to what the Spirit wants. So, yeah, there's this huge battle when you get it, but with regular practice, like as Jesus did, these feelings are eventually replaced by joy, by contentment. And there's a sense of intimacy with God, and there's a sense of spiritual power. When we deny what the flesh wants, what do we leave room for? What the Spirit wants. We live not by the flesh, we live by the Spirit. Ooh. Jesus, smart guy. So with regular practice, Jesus teaches us how to replace these things with a sense of intimacy and to gain power of the Holy Spirit. Now, it takes a while for us to wean our souls off of our addictions to the Western gods of pleasure and instant gratification and spiritual power. Because we have kind of this message, that in order to be happy, I need to get what I want. Jesus is showing us maybe the opposite is true. It takes a while to wean our souls off of these Western addictions. And so while we can't, within our flesh, we can't control our desires, so to speak, but we can influence them. And we can come to the point where they no longer control us. And that's what Jesus has shown us and what he's done here in this passage and what he alludes to here in Matthew 12. The first thing that fasting normally does is reveal where you're still in bondage. And when that's revealed, we can say no to the tempter and have the victory. Okay. So as we turn our attention now back to our Matthew 12 passage, I've mentioned all of this about the temptation and about fasting, because there is a sobering message in the words of Jesus for all who seek to advance his kingdom. Is that we need to be prepared to go the long, hard route of first winning victory over temptation. That's how Jesus did it here in Matthew 12. This is how the strong man's house got plundered. That long, hard work of winning victory over temptation. So like Jesus, it is then that we will see more success in plundering the house than we have before. Okay. Let's continue on reading in Matthew 12, but we're going to start at verse 30 now. We'll go 30 through 32. Jesus says, "Whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. And so I tell you, every kind of sin and slander can be forgiven, but blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. Anyone who speaks a word against the Son of Man will be forgiven, but anyone who speaks against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either in this age or in the age to come." Wow, that's nice and light. Jesus does not mess around, does he? Well, he tells it straight. So in response to this accusation of the Pharisees, Jesus issues this warning that, often many believers who have read it are just kind of like, oh boy, there's kind of a, what's going on here? There's maybe a little bit of worry in your heart, like, did I do that? Well, here's the thing. If you're worried about committing this sin, it's very likely that you haven't done so. But even still, this is a serious warning. And this warning is related to everything that we just read before it. Jesus is warning against what the Pharisees had just done. Seeing the work of the Spirit of God and then declaring that it must be the devil. When a person takes up a position like that of the Pharisees, when the heart is corrupted with hostility toward what is good. I mean, did you see what they did there? Jesus frees a man from demonic bondage. He heals him from being blind and mute. Impossible things. What kind of heart does it take to say, that's the devil? When a person takes up a position like that, when the heart is so corrupted, when a heart calls good evil and makes evil its good, that person has put themselves in a state that prevents forgiveness. The sign of their hardness of heart is their determination to reject any proof of Jesus' divine mission. Jesus could have done anything. I mean, when we go to John's gospel, he is raising the dead in front of their faces. Their determination to reject any proof of Jesus' divine mission, to the extent that they will even attribute God's attestation to Jesus, to the devil. Like, there's something going on in here, and it's not good. And it's not so much that they won't be forgiven as much as it is that they can't be forgiven, because they've just rejected the very means through which forgiveness would come. Forgiveness is coming through Jesus and through his kingdom mission, and that rejection puts them outside of the scope. Okay, let's finish off our passage here. So we'll go back to Matthew 12, starting at verse 33, finishing at 37. Jesus says, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good things when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. A good person brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and an evil person brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. I tell you, on the day of judgment, you will have to give account for every careless word you utter. For by your words you are justified, and by your words you are condemned. So the warning of Jesus here continues towards the words that are spoken in accusation or otherwise. Now, just so you don't get too freaked out here, I don't think Jesus is talking, did I say the F word last week or something, There's something deeper going on. I know if we're about that, a number of us would be in trouble. But Jesus is getting at something much deeper here. The Pharisees, they should be able to understand from seeing Jesus delivering people from demonic bondage and healing diseases that God was at work in him. But even if they can't figure that out for whatever reason, they can't figure out what Jesus is doing and they can't figure out God's presence in it, they should be able to figure out something as basic as the content of their own hearts by doing something so simple as paying attention to what is coming out of their mouth. The words uttered are of the utmost seriousness and will be held on account on Judgment Day. Our words matter. There's a lot of gravity in this statement here. Our words matter. But it's more than the words themselves. It's how the words indicate the state of the heart. In those words that do indicate the state of the heart, that's what will be held accountable for on Judgment Day. We need to weigh our words. Why? Because if we weigh our words, we'll learn about what's inside our heart, because our words reveal our heart. If our words are rotten, it serves as a warning that there's something in our heart that is corrupted. Now, the irony is that the only real power of the devil is to deceive. But through his deception, what happens? Hearts can be hardened against God and against one another. The Pharisees were so worried about the power of the devil being present that they weren't even able to recognize it, even when it was on their own lips and hiding in their own hearts. The deception of the devil is coming to harden hearts against God and against one another. This is where the powerful storm rages. The battle is over the heart. Jesus is making it clear with his words here. The battle is over his heart. Jesus tells us what we cultivate in the heart will produce fruit. We cannot ignore what's in here. Why? Because what's in here will come out. When the squeeze is on, what's inside will come out. And what the Pharisees had cultivated had hardened their hearts, so much so that it prevented them from seeing God. Remember in the Beatitudes, blessed are the pure in heart. Why? For they shall see God. A hardened heart is unable to see God, even when it is glaringly obvious. A power is present that no human can touch or can contain. Now, the disciples and some in the crowds, they accepted good seeds in their heart from hearing Jesus speak, from seeing what he had done. And they allowed them to be watered and nurtured. And those seeds bore fruit to the point where they start asking, could this be the son of David? This looks like something that God's doing. Like only God does that. Only God could do that. They nurtured something good in there, and it bore good fruit. They were able to see what God was doing. So as we look at these words and as we look at this whole passage, we want to learn from Jesus. We want to learn that we need to cultivate our hearts. Pay attention to our hearts, because the most serious issues of where we're going, both now and forever, will stem from here. And we can learn of what's in there by what's coming out of here. Jesus tells us, make the tree good, and the fruit will be good. He's instructing us, work on that. Become holy gardeners here. Work on making that tree good, because we want the good fruit. And we can partner with Jesus in this process. He's been inviting us into this process of gardening and cultivating our heart so that we can make the tree good and we can produce good fruit. I remember from last chapter where Jesus says to us, take my yoke upon you, like my teaching, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Jesus invites us to learn from him, to learn his process of cultivating our hearts. And specifically, while there's many things we could talk about, Jesus shows us. Specifically in this passage, we see Jesus' practice of fasting and avoiding temptation. And I tell you, I did not plan this, that this passage lined up on the first Sunday of Lent, but here we are, the first Sunday of Lent. This is the lectionary, the temptation narrative is a lectionary passage, and here it's right in our face. Jesus takes on this practice of fasting. He learns how to overcome temptation. He learns how to say no to the flesh and yes to the Spirit. He cultivates something good in his heart so good fruit can be born. And he leads us in the same path. Come, take my yoke, but learn from me step by step. Follow in my footprints. Follow in my footprints. And you can have a pure heart too, where you can see God. So as we wrap up our time today, I'm going to encourage everyone to break off into groups for prayer, but we're going to have a couple of discussion questions that we can talk about before we go into prayer. So we can actually think about some of this and actually put the words of Jesus into some action. What is something that you would like to cultivate in your heart? Jesus says, make the tree good and the fruit will be good. What's some good fruit that you would like to see? What's some good fruit, even particularly through this season of Lent, that you would like to produce, that you would like to cultivate? And how might you maybe even incorporate that somehow into how we're journeying through the Lenten season, and how you might cultivate your heart to produce good fruit?